Welcome to Category Visionaries, the show dedicated to exploring exciting visions for the future from the founders who are on the front lines building it. In each episode, we'll speak with a visionary founder who's building a new category or reimagining an existing one. We'll learn about the problem they solve, how their technology works, and unpack their vision for the future. I'm your host, Brett Stapper, CEO of Frontlines Media. Now let's dive right into today's episode. Hey everyone, and thanks for listening to another episode of Category Visionaries. Today we're speaking with Tim Weiss, CEO and co-founder of Optera, a carbon management and accounting platform that raised $17.5 million in funding. Tim, thanks for chatting with me today.
Thanks for having me, Brett.
Not a problem. Super excited for this conversation, and I would just love to begin with a quick summary of who you are and a bit more about your background.
Sure. Yes, as you mentioned, I'm Tim Weiss, CEO, co-founder of Optera. My whole career has been oriented towards climate change and addressing kind of what I feel is one of the bigger problems that we've ever felt as a society and as a human race. This started way back in undergrad when I studied environmental policy. I mashed together kind of economics, political science, environmental science, and kind of found that it was the perfect meld for me of heart and mind. I'm fundamentally a data nerd and also kind of very mission driven as a human and want to kind of orient my skills and my time towards big problems. And so there were none kind of better suited to my skills and my ambitions in life than really helping address climate change and solving that problem. Ultimately working for NGO. I started my career in Southern Africa, working on very distributed renewable energy in areas where folks live kind of without access to the grid, and scaling that organization to 4 countries. And really understanding what does it take to get something off the ground and what does it take to actually have an impact on people's lives. And really that was my first taste of entrepreneurship in a different setting. And I kind of knew from then that I was going to orient my career on sustainability, on climate, and then also probably have a bent of entrepreneurship along the way.
How have you seen the conversation around climate change over the last, let's say, 10 years?
Well, I would say when I started in this journey, we didn't talk about climate change. It was interesting, especially in conversations with sustainability functions in large multinationals. There was kind of a very roundabout way of oriented towards like, why are we doing this and what are we doing, and kind of treading lightly in certain areas. And now it's fully front and center. I mean, the global conversation is pretty apropos to the corporate conversation at this point. And I would say the corporations in many instances are a step ahead. One of the biggest risks that's posed to business right now is how are you going to transition to the low carbon economy? We're not going to consume fossil fuels to the same degree that we have historically as we will in the next 5 to 10 years. And I think as the kind of timely nature of that risk and opportunity is kind of presented in front of business leaders, the overall appetite to make real investments and to really move in this area has fundamentally changed. And so from 10 years ago, where we saw this being done with a handful of companies and 100% voluntarily, and I would say without really much accountability and much at stake, it feels like the stakes are incredibly high and the intentions to follow through, the intentions to make meaningful progress are higher than ever.
Let's switch gears now. Let's dive a bit deeper into the company and let's talk about the history first. I understand it has a long history here. It's not a new startup. So take us back to the founding of the company or the early days of the company, and then let's talk through when you joined and when you got involved.
Yeah, so there was a precursor firm prior to that kind of led into Optera. It was a boutique consulting firm that founded way back in 2006 by my co-founders. They started this consulting firm that spun out of an organization kind of called the Rocky Mountain Institute, and they were supporting large multinationals on their energy strategy, on establishing and quantifying kind of their emissions, establishing their sustainability programs, setting meaningful targets for energy efficiency, for renewable energy, for climate. And a lot of the foundational work that they had done with some multinationals kind of set the standards that are now pretty well used across the industry today. I met them in 2015. It was around when the Paris Agreement was getting signed, and we saw a significant uptick in corporate ambition on climate change. They were setting goals that were fundamentally challenging to achieve. And what we did is market research together. I was finishing business school and working at AES and their distributed energy team, and was interested in getting into corporate sustainability with all of this activity coming out of Paris. And so we interviewed folks from GM and Procter & Gamble and Cisco and Cola, like really super large brands, large companies that were setting more ambitious goals. And really the proposition was, how are you guys going to hit these? How are you going to manage the data behind these initiatives? And the answer was all spreadsheets and consultants, and they didn't really have their hands around all the information they needed and insights they needed to make meaningful progress. So with that, I jumped ship. I joined my co-founders, Jason and Ty, and we started building what has now become Optera, and transitioning from software company, transitioning from a services company to now a SaaS company. We made that transition. We bootstrapped for a handful of years, and then I went out and raised our seed round in 2020. So from really 2021 on, we've been on the venture-backed path. As you mentioned, raised our Series A last year, and it's really been kind of off to the races since then as a predominantly SaaS-based business.
What was that journey like transitioning from a services business to software? I know a lot of companies dream of being able to make that switch, but I think a lot of companies also die as they make that transition. What did you guys get right?
Yeah, I think the fundamentals are you got to have discipline. Services businesses can go any direction the client wants, and you can kind of sell anything. Then you right away, when you start building product and software, that becomes completely unviable, right? Where you can't build everything. You have to build something that works for a critical mass that helps you get to certain product market fit and scale, because you cannot just send engineers in all directions at once. So for us, this started honestly by building a pretty insane Excel model. I'm not an engineer by training, but now they're my co-founders, or they're physical engineers, not computer engineers. And so we built a prototype of our software in Excel that we used across half a dozen clients. And what we saw is that it was delivering value across all of them. And if we actually wrote code and build this into a platform, it could deliver exponentially more value. And they didn't really need bespoke solutions. They all needed something similar. And we built it kind of in a way that was transferable across industries, across company size. So it was really about keeping that level of discipline. In the power of a services business is you can learn so much from your customers. And that's what you need to start a business. You need to understand what value prop you have. You need to understand what their needs are. And I believe that professional services are a tremendous way to understand that. When you are on the hook for really delivering and really catering to their needs, you have to balance that with something that is repeatable, something that is going to be transferable across customers, across clients. I fundamentally think that balance is something that we just got right, and it's hard. You got to say no to things. You got to say yes to some things, and then know that you're going to keep delivering those with services and not productize them yet. And that balance is something that I think a lot of folks struggle with, and they don't quite find that critical mass, and they don't find the thing that's repeatable. And we were fortunate to find that.
Outside of funding, are there any numbers that you can share just so we can understand the scale that you're operating at today?
Yeah, we have roughly 60 folks on our team, and we're well beyond the early innings on revenue. We have a lot of multinationals using our platform. We're well entrenched in their workflows across their organizations. So rapidly appearing, kind of trending towards our later stage growth rounds and the key milestones there. That's kind of general size and magnitude of where we are.
When it comes to the marketing philosophy, how would you describe your approach to marketing?
For us, a lot of it is driven by building a reputable brand. We sell to large enterprise. And large enterprise is long sales cycles, complicated sales cycles. It's a very discerning buyer. And so for us, content strategy is really important. A lot of what we do is really ensuring that we are building customer referral engines and amplifying kind of the voices of our customers that love us and sing our praises. And that's really kind of the core focus. We have built really strong partnerships and try to leverage those to their greatest effect. And so a lot of our work stems from kind of thought leadership and a strong foundation in content and branding that we kind of leverage to help go after kind of large enterprise and build what we feel is a meaningful presence in the market.
This show is brought to you by Frontlines Media, a podcast production studio that helps B2B founders launch, manage, and grow their own podcast. Now, if you're a founder, you may be thinking, I don't have time to host a podcast. I've got a company to build. Well, that's exactly what we built our service to do. You show up and host, and we handle literally everything else. To set up a call to discuss launching your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. Now, back to today's episode.
Yeah, your branding is just beautiful, and I recommend to everyone listening in to go check it out because it's just great branding. Also on the website, the messaging is just very crisp. It's very clear what you do exactly. I often bring founders on and I'm trying to prep for the interview and I'm on their website and I spend 10 minutes and I have no idea what they do. With your website, it's very clear. Was it always that way though, or was it a journey to get this level of message clarity?
Oh, it was a complete journey. I've learned about myself over the years and over this journey that as a leader, one of my core functions is to provide clarity to all the key stakeholders, to my team, to customers, to investors. And the more clear you are, the more effective you are at your job. And so there's a bit of, I would say, a forcing function, I think, that was driving this, where me and my team, and I give a lot of credit to my team on this, where we just weren't satisfied with mediocrity in terms of communication. We still aren't, we never are. And so we're always trying to find the most precise, clear way of articulating ourselves to the market and to customers, to everyone. Some of my most satisfying moments from a business context are when we hit those moments of clarity, when we find that aha, where it's like, oh, it just makes sense now. Like, I can explain this to someone who doesn't know anything about what we do. And it takes a discerning eye. You have to critique yourself. I think founders that have raised capital, that have hit some milestones and gone to maybe 100, 2, 3, 4, 5 million in revenue, they feel a bit of satisfaction of clear success points on themselves or from their work. But you have to always kind of view your own work with a critical eye. And I think that's the only way to get at really meaningful outcomes and messaging. And I think it's been having an incredible team that is not comfortable with what we view as mediocrity, I think, is what helps us get to that point. And we're still working. I'd say that there's nothing about what we've done is perfect, and we just have to constantly make it better and better.
What about your market category? Is it carbon management, carbon accounting?
Yeah, predominantly we're operating in one of, maybe other folks feel this way about their own industries, but we are in a very messy landscape where there's a million different players and they're all trying to take different approaches to this challenge. But for us, ultimately, we are a carbon emissions management platform for multinationals. We're helping organizations quantify and manage the emissions from everything that they touch, from how their products are manufactured, from their operations, from the products that they sell. If they're an investor, their investment assets, everything that you will need to transition to low carbon economy. Now you need data on it, you need to report it, disclose it to the world. And that's what we help enable.
Did you start off being enterprise focused, or were you SMB mid-market and then worked your way up to enterprise?
We started enterprise. It's kind of different from a lot of other markets where if you think about how sustainability and climate is unfolding, pressure to address climate change is kind of starting from the top. Ultimately, mid-market SMEs, they don't really have a lot of emissions to manage. They don't really have existential risks as they transition to the low carbon economy. A lot of that work is going to be done for them because their utilities are going to get cleaner. The AWS servers or Google Azure, all the servers that they're going to use to operate their business are already going to net zero. And so really the pressure from investors, regulators, customers has always been applied to the largest companies in the world. And then it ripples down market. And that's what we've done. We've followed that pressure. We've followed that momentum. And so we cater to kind of large enterprise, and we kind of view it as we're building the solution that works for where the market is today and where it's evolving to. And so we're building solutions that can really truly scale across kind of all large enterprise and then down market as well.
Can you paint a picture for us of what that category landscape looks like when it comes to carbon management and carbon accounting? Really just want to understand how you are positioned within that market, because I know it's a crowded space. I read TechCrunch every day, and I feel like there's more and more startups that are trying to move into this category. So how do you think about positioning in the category?
Yeah, it's an incredibly crowded, noisy space, and it's because there's not a lot of mystery here. This is now a regulated industry. I mean, earlier this week, we're talking in early March, the SEC just released or finalized their rules that require public companies to disclose their carbon emissions and also their climate risk. This is following on the heels of California having an even more extensive rule for any company that essentially touches the California economy. And then also in Europe is 5 steps ahead with more meaningful regulation as well. So ultimately, there's a lot of demand and everyone sees a lot of opportunity here, which has created a lot of interest and a lot of competitors and a lot of investors attracted to it. Ultimately, what we find is that this industry is not for the faint of heart, because the challenge is in helping an organization not only measure, but decarbonize across everything, not just their operations, but their supply chain, their products, their investment assets, kind of all the core functions, the logistics, all these things, is immensely challenging. And providing them information that is not only like accurate, but it's actually actionable. And it's not just using black boxes or not just using high level industry averages or assumptions, but using direct data is a really challenging proposition. And that's what we've gone after. And so I'd say that there's a lot of companies that have attempted to build what I would characterize as an easy button. in climate. So a really simple calculator that would apply to giving you the 30,000 foot view or would apply to SMEs. But if you're dealing with a company that is meaningfully trying to achieve real outcomes, and if they are really trying to de-risk their business, if they're really trying to manage their supply chain and influence the behavior of how their products are made, then you need real data. You actually need to know what those suppliers are, what share of their activity you're responsible for, and where is it stemming from in the world. And that's what we do better than anyone else. And so we've kind of clued in on ultimately the upper echelons of this market require real information, real data, and that's what we're the best at. And I think that it's rooted in that kind of foundation of us understanding this from a services and kind of expert services mentality, and then building product that works for hundreds and thousands of companies. And so that's a little bit of our sweet spot. I think that most of the other folks in our market, or many others, and I have a lot of respect for a lot of our competitors. I think we're all trying to solve a really hard problem, and it's great that folks are. I think for us, we're just a little bit more laser focused on, I'd say, some of the meaty problems that span complicated supply chains, complicated product type value chains, and others might be focused on more simpler companies or different types of industry verticals that we don't particularly interact with.
To date, what do you think's been the most important go-to-market decision that you've made?
Oh, that's a good question. I gotta say that maybe this isn't that much. I don't think it's not like a silver bullet, but having customers that love you is the most important thing. And they have been our best sales channel. When you are competing in an industry where everyone is sending them paid ads, everyone has millions of dollars to spend on marketing and advertising, what's the best way to cut through? We'll say, hey, I use Optera and I love it. You should take their call. There's kind of nothing better. And we just tried to build that love, that referral engine, and we keep doing it. You're never done. And that supersedes any other spend that you can do, any other kind of initiative you could have. And it's hard. It requires a lot of work and a lot of attention and kind of, I would say, a relentless pursuit of quality. And that's something that I think a lot of folks, it's certainly worked in our industry in a crowded space that focuses on enterprise. So building that customer referral engine is something that's been probably the most important critical factor of our success.
Final question for you. Let's zoom out 3 to 5 years into the future. What's the big picture vision here?
We're trying to help the globe decarbonize, and that is going to happen through companies. Companies touch global emissions. If you're going to look for the lever points to tackle climate change, government is going to touch this through regulation of companies. And so what's really going to happen is companies are going to move the needle, and they need data and tools to do that effectively. So for us, this is about global scale. This is about going after the companies that matter the most in transitioning to a low carbon economy. Fundamentally, that's where I think the most value in this market is going to be derived from. And that's kind of been our focus. So I won't be satisfied until we are facilitating and helping thousands of the largest companies in the world ultimately achieve net zero.
Love it. Love the vision. I've really loved this conversation. We are up on time, so we're going to have to wrap here. Before we do, if there's any founders that are listening in and they want to follow along with your journey, where should they go?
Yeah, follow me on LinkedIn. I'm probably most active there. And I'll just say that I love interacting with founders. We're a unique breed, people that really want to solve and tackle meaty problems. And so always happy to connect.
Awesome. Tim, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Brett.
This episode of Category Visionaries is brought to you by Frontlines Media, Silicon Valley's leading podcast production studio. If you're a B2B founder looking for help launching and growing your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. And for the latest episode, search for Category Visionaries on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.